Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Traurig. Despite my last name, I'm very happy to be here this morning to share with you some regulatory data and some of our findings at CBD-Intel, and particularly how it relates to EU harmonization on CBD products from a regulatory perspective. I'm a recovering attorney from the US, and I'm the head legal analyst at CBD-Intel. Quickly, what we'll cover this morning, the landmark Kanavape decision from the EU Court of Justice from about a year and a half ago. We will talk about that decision, give you an overview and some background on what happened there, some implications of that ruling, some steps towards regulatory harmonization in the EU since that ruling was handed down, a few member state responses in particular that are of note, and then we'll talk about the future, kind of looking forward, where are things going from here. Quickly to tell you a little bit about CBD-Intel, so we provide market and regulatory data. We are impartial, independent, and so for that reason we have clients who are not only companies but regulators, trade organizations, World Health Organization, US FDA. We provide data for the European Commission as well. So being independent and impartial is a big part of our business model so that everyone can rely on our data and it be unbiased. We provide market data and analysis for, I believe, 14 markets on the market side. Then my division, the regulatory department, we have over 60 countries now and over 100 jurisdictions across the world that we have regulatory data for CBD. Also medical cannabis and recreational as well. How do we do that? We provide detailed market reports, regulatory reports, email alerts every day to our clients to tell them what they need to know about what has happened in the industry that day. We also do customized research and consultancy for our clients. So, I'm here to share with you some of our findings from my talented colleague Lorenzo Guaragna. He wrote a report. This was something that we had in the works for a while. And what we wanted to do was, after the Kanavape ruling by the Court of Justice of the EU, which happened about a year and a half ago, we wanted to take a look and say, okay, well, that was supposed to be a kind of watershed regulatory event for the EU on CBD. So we wanted to look at what has actually happened. Did what we thought was going to happen, did that really come to fruition? And how has that ruling really affected the market, and certainly from a regulatory perspective? So I've mentioned this case, Kanavape, and I want to just make sure that everyone knows what it is. I'll give you a little background for anyone who may not know. Try not to get too deep into the legal principles, but so in 2018 there were two men in France who were arrested for marketing CBD isolate that was in vape pens. They were legally produced in Czech Republic and marketed in France. The problem was France considered any extract from the flower of a cannabis plant to be a narcotic, so they charged these men criminally. Now the CBD at issue here was extracted from the entirety of the plant, meaning the flower, and not just the seeds or leaves, which you'll see the legal consequence of that in a moment. After they were convicted, the case was appealed and ultimately brought before the EU Court of Justice. So the issues here, I don't want to get bogged down in the legality of it, but a couple key principles that you should be aware of. Article 34 of the Treaty of Functioning of the EU says that quantitative restrictions on imports and all measures having equivalent effect shall be prohibited between member states. So this is that principle you may have heard, the freedom of movement of goods within the EU. That's where this comes from. And then there are some exceptions, though, in that it does not preclude prohibitions or restrictions on imports, exports, or goods in transit justified on grounds of public morality, public policy, public security, protection of health. So that's essentially also where France had justified was this protection of health. They said that, you know, allowing CBD as extracted from the flower was a public health risk. So the issue before the court was, can France justify its ban on CBD on public health grounds? So what the court had to do is, you know, look at France's interpretation of the UN Single Convention, and so just a couple key definitions here, just so that you know where their interpretation comes from. And quite honestly, based on the text of the convention, it was quite logical. They just took a literal interpretation, because the Single Convention lists as a Schedule 1 narcotic cannabis, cannabis resin, any extracts and tinctures of cannabis. And then it defines cannabis as the flowering or fruiting tops of the cannabis plant, excuse me, excluding the seeds and leaves when not accompanied by the tops. So this is where France took a literal interpretation and concluded that CBD as extracted from the flower is a narcotic. Now I'll let you read the crux of the court's decision here. But essentially what they said is that the Treaty of Functioning of the EU must be interpreted as not allowing countries to ban the marketing of CBD lawfully produced in another member state, even if it is extracted from the flowering tops of the cannabis plant, unless the legislation is appropriate for securing the attainment of public health. So let's talk about some of the implications. What does that mean? We want to unpack that a little bit. I want to tell you a little bit about what it does mean and what it does not. So what the court's decision does do is it means that CBD, as extracted from the entirety of the cannabis plant, is not a narcotic under the UN Single Convention. It also means that the marketing of vaping products containing CBD isolate that is lawfully produced in the EU cannot be banned by another member state. It also, you know, I talked about France's interpretation of the Single Convention. While it doesn't directly require the court's interpretation, it really casts doubt on this interpretation of the UN Convention. And as we will see, that interpretation is still held by many, many member states throughout the EU. So it really does cast doubt on that literal interpretation. And finally, it may require a showing of public health justification for banning any CBD products. We will see, though, you know, there are other considerations. These were vape products that were at issue. Obviously, there are other considerations and processes for things like foods, as you're all aware. But almost equally importantly is, what does the decision not do? It did not address broad or full spectrum products. THC was not addressed. It was strictly CBD isolate. This one may be a little more controversial, but I do believe this. It does not strip the member states' autonomy to regulate the production and processing of hemp within their own borders. And I'll address that a little bit further later. It does not legalize all CBD products in the EU. As you're probably all aware, you know, the novel foods applications are a lengthy process, and that is not really affected by the court's ruling. And it may seem obvious, but it's important to note, it does not apply outside of the EU. Now, some courts or authorities may look to, you know, a prestigious court like the, you know, Court of Justice of the EU, and you know, find their logic persuasive, but it would not apply anywhere outside of the EU. Some more implications. I want to go through, you know, kind of for certain product types, what the implications of the ruling are. So vapes, that was, you know, what was at issue here? So that's the most clear cut. And so the court did directly hold that a member state cannot prohibit the marketing of a CBD vape product that is lawfully produced in another member state. That one should be easy. Unfortunately, as you'll see shortly, it's not so easy. Flower extraction, I talked about how the court's ruling, really cast doubt on this literal interpretation of the UN Single Convention. But it is important to keep in mind that, I talked about those principles of the freedom of movement of goods. And that's really what the court's decision was based upon. So I do believe that that it would not, that countries will still be allowed to regulate the production, processing within their own borders. So if they do wish to ban flower extraction, although that interpretation has been, seriously doubted by the court, they may still have the ability to do that within their own borders because, again, this was based on the movement of goods between member states. Whereas if it's within your own borders still, that may still be possible. Cosmetics. Cosmetics were not addressed at all by the Court of Justice, but I don't think it's a very far of a logical leap to say, okay, well, if they say that CBD, whenever you inhale it in a vape and you inhale it into your lungs, if that's not enough of a public health concern, then certainly rubbing it on your skin shouldn't be either. And as we'll see, it ended up having a tremendous impact on CBD and cosmetics in the EU. Hemp flower. Here I'm talking about smokable hemp flower as a finished product. The Court of Justice only addressed CBD as it was extracted from the flower. So obviously within the flower you have many other cannabinoids, terpenes, everything that comes along with it. So it's not directly affected, but you can analogize. The court says it's as if hemp is like whenever the resin is removed. So could that extend to the whole hemp flower? Perhaps, but then you get into some other issues. We talked about they have to be able to justify it on public health grounds. But whenever you're talking about a combustible product, obviously there's some other concerns there for public health. And then also some enforcement confusion whenever this played out, in the US, became much of an issue where states that did not allow recreational cannabis, they ended up not hardly being able to enforce their cannabis laws because law enforcement officers couldn't tell the difference by looking at a hemp flower versus a high THC flower. And so, they certainly, for better or for worse, had real issues, enforcing their cannabis laws. So I made this chart here to I think it's important to keep in mind where we were before the Kanavape decision and see how things have evolved since then. So for food, some of you may recall before this decision came down, the European Commission had a preliminary view, much like France, that CBD was a narcotic, and they placed a hold on novel food applications because of that interpretation. Well, as a direct impact of the Kanavape decision, they changed their position and resumed the application process. And now where we stand, they have concluded that CBD may be a ingredient in food. Although, as many of you may know, there is this other hold where they're seeking more data on the safety of CBD. Won't get into that too much. But then cosmetics. Before the decision was handed down, the CBD extract was not included in the catalog of cosmetic ingredients. As a direct result of the Kanavape decision, it was added to the costing. And then we have 25 of the 27 member states covered in our regulatory data. It does not include Luxembourg or Malta for the moment, although that data is coming in. So for what we found is that 19 of the 25 member states that we cover allow CBD in cosmetics. Vapes, as I said, that was the most clear-cut takeaway from the decision. And before, not too much changed really. Before the Kanavape decision, member states were free to regulate CBD vape products as they saw fit. The direct impact of the ruling is that that a member state cannot ban the marketing of these products that are lawfully produced in another member state. But what we're seeing is that they keep banning them. 12 out of the 25 covered member states still ban CBD vapes. We're in constant contact with regulators across the EU. We question them on this all the time and how they are justifying such bans. And to this day, we still have not received much of a substantive response. Flower extraction. Before Kanavape, member states were free to regulate flower extraction as they saw fit. And then the direct impact of the ruling is that member states might not be allowed to, have that same interpretation, although within their own borders. Again, they may still have some autonomy. And then what we found is that 10 out of the 25 member states that we cover still ban flower extraction. So this chart kind of shows you the different kind of areas that were, in some way, shape, or form were addressed by the Kanavape decision, and kind of see where we've seen the most compliance with the ruling. As I mentioned, you would think that this was the clear cut, this was the most clear type of product that we should see the most compliance, meaning that we should see this green bar, meaning that they allow CBD vapes. You would think that that would be the highest bar. It is not. And actually, cosmetics, because of the European Commission including CBD extract into the costing, we're actually seeing the most compliance when it comes to cosmetics, far more than vapes. That was not honestly a conclusion that we saw coming before we started collecting this data. And then flower extraction. We still see many member states still banning flower extraction. But there is, more member states are compliant with the Kanavape ruling than are not. And then this is a breakdown. So this is for vaping products, just to show you the EU member states that are compliant. Those would be the countries in green there, versus the ones in red who still ban CBD vapes. Flower extraction, you can see the member states who still ban it versus the ones that allow it. So now let's talk about cosmetics. As I showed in the previous slide, cosmetics were essentially the big winner from the Kanavape decision. So, and I mentioned that the Kanavape ruling led to the inclusion of CBD in the costing. There is the EC, the European Commission Working Group on Cosmetic Products, that has prepared a non-paper draft to regulate CBD in cosmetics, and that began in just a couple months ago. This was interesting. There's a civil dialogue group within the European Commission that is looking at regulating CBD in cosmetics, and from their meeting back in March, they came to the preliminary analysis. They say the preliminary analysis shows that most cannabis/hemp ingredients should not be prohibited a priori in cosmetic products if other safety conditions are also met, which is a pretty bold statement. They even go beyond just CBD isolate. They say, cannabis and hemp ingredients more generally may be allowed. And so here you see the member states that are allowing CBD in cosmetics. You see a lot more green than the other maps. I wanted to highlight a few individual member state responses because I do find them important and what we can take away from them. So first of all, to go back to our guys who were arrested and charged with selling CBD vapes, they did find that France did dismiss those charges in November of last year. France then had to get into compliance with the Kanavape ruling. So France notified the European Commission in July of last year of a decree that they released to become compliant with the ruling. And what the decree does generally is it broadly allows hemp extracts with up to 0.3% THC, but it does include a ban on the sale of hemp flower. We obtained some documentation of the correspondence between the European Commission and the French authorities, where the European Commission did call out the French authorities and question them, how are they justifying this ban on hemp flowers? Nonetheless, France did it anyways. They issued the decree with the flower ban intact, but that has now been challenged in court. That ban has been temporarily suspended back in January. As preliminarily, at least, the judge found insufficient grounds for a hemp flower ban, and they are expecting a ruling in that case by the end of the year. A few other non-compliant member states that I just want to highlight quickly. Italy, still banning CBD vapes, oils, flowers. Again, we follow up with the authorities regularly and, are asking how are you justifying that, and haven't received much of a adequate response in that regard. Portugal, back in February, the National Authority for Medicines and Health Products issued a circular stressing that the use of cannabis plant for any purposes other than medicinal purposes is prohibited, and they continue to prohibit CBD in cosmetics unless it comes from the seeds. Spain, where I live, they still hold essentially the same interpretation that the Court of Justice rejected by France. And last year, they published an information note that states that hemp flowers and CBD, when they are obtained from the flower, are considered narcotic products under Spanish law and international law, despite what the Court of Justice said. So let's talk about the future of harmonization in the EU after the Kanavape decision. Foods, the novel food application process is still ongoing, and the Commission has asked for, or EFSA has asked for more data. But as a result of the Kanavape decision, they resumed the application process, and they did concede that it is not a narcotic, and therefore it can qualify as food. Cosmetics, as I've touched on a bit, but looking forward, the European Commission is expected to deliver a revised paper in November of this year on whether the cosmetic product regulations need to be amended to accommodate for hemp extracts in cosmetics, and that will be after the review of the non-paper based on stakeholder feedback. The review is likely to address this entry 306 to the annex of the cosmetics regulation, which precludes narcotics from being in cosmetics. And as we said, since the Court of Justice has concluded that CBD is not a narcotic, they may need to amend that section. Flower and vapes, here's something I haven't really touched on. I think that is important for anybody who's in the CBD sector, particularly if you are selling, hemp flower, CBD flower, or CBD vapes. CBD-Intel is part of Tamarind Intelligence, which is kind of our umbrella company. We also cover the e-cigarette sector and tobacco alternative sector. So we have, good insights into what has happened in those areas, and we track those and see what has happened with the regulation of those. And it is our belief, based on trends that have happened within Europe, that CBD will be included in the Tobacco Product Directive and the Tobacco Excise Directive. And that, this could really have an effect on, it will include taxation, restrictions on online sales, advertising, marketing, labeling. Again, this will only affect, kind of inhalable products, so CBD vapes and flower. that directive is expected to be adopted in 2024 and potentially put into place in like 2025 or 2026. But anyone who is in this, is interested or is selling these products would be wise to be following what's happening with the TPD. And finally, France is a guinea pig. As I kind of went through, they're having to now justify everything to the European Commission and to the courts. Like it or not, they are now, having to kind of be the guinea pig to see, okay, how is this ruling really going to play out, and how far does it extend? Does it extend to smokable flower, for example? We're likely to find out through France. So just to end, some key takeaways. Many member states are remaining defiant in implementing the principles of the Kanavape decision. But the decision, has set off kind of a chain of regulatory events that has, will continue to trickle down to member states, as I showed earlier. And CBD cosmetics have oddly been the winner of the Kanavape ruling, despite it not actually being addressed by the court. And finally, the Kanavape decision, has in large part kickstarted the regulation of CBD in Europe. As I mentioned, we do cover other sectors in our company, and so we've seen where these products that are in kind of legal gray areas, whenever you start to see regulation of the products, that is a good thing. It establishes, the legitimacy and the legality of products. So we view this, even though it may be taking a little bit longer than we thought it might or hoped that it would, we see this as a very positive step for the CBD industry and probably more largely as for the cannabis sector within Europe. Here's my information. I think I have a roundtable here afterwards, so be happy to speak to anyone about any of this, and thank you all so much.